Every new programmer falls into the same trap, blindly copying their own code and just pasting it somewhere else. But there is a much better way, and today we're going to learn the permanent cure for copy paste coding. But instead of just giving you a technical definition, let's start with a story. Let's check in on a programmer friend of ours who's trying to send out some party invitations. He's got the right idea: greet each guest and make them feel comfortable. But he's been copy pasting the same welcome message over and over again for each guest and only changing their names. And this is getting pretty tiring. And if he ever wants to change the welcome message itself, for example, welcome to our Python party, well, that's a lot of searching and fixing. Surely there's a smarter way. What if we could write the welcome message just once and have it work for everyone? The better way is to create a recipe. Just like in a cookbook, you write the steps for a cake once and reuse them anytime you bake. So let's say we will have a recipe called Welcome Guest and it has some steps. In step 1, we will say hello to the guest, and step 2, welcome to the party. In Python, that recipe is called a function. We use the keyword def, which stands for define, give it a name, here welcome guest, and list the steps inside, all nicely indented. Now we have got our very own reusable command. But our recipe here isn't very personal. It says the same thing every time to each guest. A cake recipe needs ingredients like flour and sugar, and our welcome recipe needs an ingredient too, the guest's name. So we need to have the guest's name because we will say hello, Bob, hello, Alice. So we need to have this in our input to the recipe. In Python, these ingredients are called parameters. They're variables you put inside the parentheses when defining the function, acting as placeholders. So now we update our function such that it has one input parameter called guest name. This enables us to use this variable inside our function such that we can say hello Bob, hello Alice. Now we can combine this with a for loop to loop over each guest in our list and use our function to welcome each guest. Now, before we jump into code, I want to point out that some functions just do something, like our welcome guest function just prints a message. They perform an action but don't give anything back. Other functions, for example, this function here called add numbers, which gets two input parameters, x and y, and it gives us back a result. In Python, when you want a function to give you back a result, you can use the return statement, as in this example. So we use a return, and this function, add numbers, will return the result, which is the addition of x plus y. All right, enough talking. Let's start writing some functions. All right, here I have the list of our guests for the party. Let's send an invitation to each guest. So we would do print hello Bob, and we will also say print welcome to the party. Now, for all the other guests, we need to send a similar welcome invitation. So what a beginner programmer will normally do is that they will basically copy this and paste it again, and then they will only change the name. So it will be Alice, copy paste. It will be Hannah. And this is already bothering me. It's quite tiring. And imagine if you have hundreds of guests in your list. And John. All right, let's run our code and see if it works. Okay, we see that our code runs indeed, and we send invitation to our guests. Now, let's do this with Python functions. So let me open a cell and we will say define, we will use the def, and then we will call our function welcome guest, and our function will have one input parameter. It will be the name of the guest. I will call it guest name, and then we will basically have our welcome message. So let me copy this. And this time, instead of this, we will have guest name. Then we can make it like this. All right, so now we define a function called welcome guest, which will have our welcome message. It gets one input parameter, which it uses it in the hello, in the first print. So let's run this. When we run this, Python will run this function, and it will know that this basically this variable is a function. So but nothing happens because we haven't still called this function. So let's call this function. So we can do welcome guest, and then inside the parentheses we need to now provide the only input parameter, which is the guest name. So we can use our list. So we had guests here. So to send an invitation to Bob, we will say guests, and then Bob is in the first position. We can do the same for other guests. This is also getting quite repetitive again, but I just want to show you, you don't have to do this. I'm doing it for you. We will have a better way of doing this. Guests. All right, so let's run to see first if our function actually works. So yes, we have the same output. So we're sending invitation messages to all our guests, but this is also repetitive. We don't want to do this. So the better way is to use a for loop. So we would do for guest in guest. So we're looping over each of the guests in the list, and then we can call our function and provide the input parameter. Now this is way cleaner. Let's see if it actually works. And yes, we have the exact output. Everything looks the same, except that now we have used a clean and only two lines of code to achieve the same thing that we had with here 8 lines of code, and later here 4 lines of code. Now remember that if our list has hundreds of guests, then the first method of just copy pasting will not work, but this code will exactly stay the same, and then we can send the invitations to any number of guests basically. Let's take a look at our welcome guest function again. So we see that our function gets an input parameter and it does some action, but you notice that it doesn't use the return statement. It doesn't return a value when we call it. So what if we want to, let's say, sum two variables and return the outcome? So let's do that. Let's define a function, my add, which gets two variables, x and y, and it basically sums them up. And it uses the return statement to return the sum. Let's define this. Let's run this, that Python knows this function exists. And let's now say x is 2, y is 4. And let's now call our function, my add and give our inputs. Now you see that here this function, because it's using the return statement, we can return the value and assign it to a new variable, which is output here. And let me print output as well, that we can see its value. All right, let's run this. Yes, and we see that we have the sum of 2 and 4, which is 6. So in this video, we learned what Python functions are and when we should use them. More specifically, we saw two types of Python functions. One type, such as the welcome guest function, does some actions for a given inputs, but it doesn't return anything. And other types of functions could also return a value, such as this myAdd functions that returns a value. In the next video, we will learn about Python dictionaries, and we will see why they're such an amazing data types to work with. Until then.